thought that'd be a good way to start, just to give us a sense of your own academic and if you're comfortable, maybe religious or spiritual interests, and how you got motivated to research this part of the world.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Michael, to have me and to discuss about this, my book, Religious Peacebuilding in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I'm actually happy to do that. So basically, I can say that first, I was born in the Congo, the current Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, precisely in what is often called Eastern DRC, in Kasongo, which is a town in Eastern Congo in the province of Maniema. So I start by that just to indicate that this particular province is predominantly Muslim, mainly because of its historical encounters with the Arabs who were involved in different trades, including slavery. And so I grew up in this environment in addition to be a Catholic, where I grew up in the Catholic family, went to a Catholic high school of the Marist brothers. So I'm actually saying this to highlight the importance of living in my view, a peaceful interreligious environment where you had different religious groups, and religion was really a very important aspect when I was growing up. In fact, I was actually planning to be a priest. I started 1 year before heading to the minor seminary, and
wow.
I was really I was really close to priests, and they were part of my should I say mentorship. They were really mentors to me, and they would come and get me, go around, and so on and so forth. So I actually had that priesthood pathway. So from there, the war that started in Congo in 1990s, probably 96, 97, we'll probably talk about this. I actually thought that religious actors in a population of 90 million people, 95% of them are actually Christian. So I thought that probably, and definitely Christian in particular, will have something to contribute, at least in initiatives towards peace building and changing the situation in the Congo.
Maybe Raji, we could talk. You touched a little bit just there on the history. If you could give us just a very brief kind of summary of the recent history of this region. I'm interested too in maybe how, I know people are familiar with the tragedy of the Rwandan civil war and the genocide of the 90s, and how that impacted the region, and why this is such a region in need of peace building. Just maybe the brief kind of from the 90s on, if you could sketch that for us.
Yeah, sure. So Congo is surrounded by 9 different states or countries, if you want. And should I say probably half of them are actually going through conflict, and very violent conflict. You have Sudan, South Sudan, you have Burundi, you have Uganda with some of the rebellious groups. You also have Rwanda. You just mentioned about the genocide in 1994. So I can actually say that the series or the ongoing conflict in DRC started from the 90s, especially after the flux of these refugees in Eastern DRC coming from Rwanda, and so on and so forth. So it's very important to actually include religious initiatives, religious actors in trying to provide ways to tackle these conflicts that have actually keep on going. As we're actually speaking, there is war going on in Goma area, probably 20, 25 kilometers from Goma, which is one of the hub of the eastern part of Congo. So I should maybe say that this is critical. It's very critical in terms of finding solutions, and not only solution, but conflict transformation in terms of relationship between communities that have shared, that share actually borders, and peace is actually, positive peace is in dear need in that particular part of Congo.
Could you maybe build on that a bit and talk about, I know the book looked at 3 specific religious communities, you know, the Roman Catholic, the Community of Baptist churches, and the Arch Revival churches. I'm wondering if you could talk about maybe how each of those groups is instantiated in the DRC, and kind of what that looks like, and how their dialogue maybe takes form or does not take form, and why you chose to focus on those 3 groups.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. So just to maybe highlight a little bit on the difference between conflict resolution and conflict transformation. So conflict resolution mainly is actually to cease conflict that is going on. And then the outcome of both is actually the main difference. One of them would be to mediate the conflict, to ensure that subsequent steps or phases to conflict resolution, if you want. I hate the word resolution. Is kind of a momentary, really, or punctual resolution of a particular issue. However, conflict transformation is really understanding the root causes of those conflicts, so that the peace that we endeavor to have in those environments could be sustainable and sustaining, without necessarily having mediators, without necessarily having all those factors or input, especially external input, to maintain the peace. So this is the issue that we have actually encountered in the Eastern Congo. We always go from mediation to mediation. There is nothing about mediation. However, those mediation are usually a resolution to specific issues without necessarily transforming the root causes of those conflicts. And of course, they are cost related, time related to any of those endeavors. So talking about the 3 specific churches that I focus in my research, one being the Catholic Church, the second one is CBK, which is Communauté Baptiste au Centre de l'Afrique. This is a Baptist community, part of the Protestant church. And then the third one is a non-denominational or revival church called Arche de l'Alliance. So the main reason for choosing these 3 religious groups, as I mentioned earlier on, was to have a map, the religious actors that surround the social, political, and religious landscape of Congo. So once we understand what are the main religious actors, I think it would be very useful to actually put them to contribution in terms of at least including them in conflict transformation. So the emphasis was not only on the, should I say, denominational aspect of it, but also from the top-down, bottom-up approach. It's not just an emphasis on the leaders of those 3 churches, but it was also important to highlight, also at least include, those who suffer from all those conflicts. So the Catholic Church and the Protestant actually came to Congo, as I actually share in this book. Congo has undergone 2 main evangelization periods. One in the end of the 15th century, all the way to the mid and 19th century, with the arrival of King Leopold II, and then the second evangelization period actually took off from King Leopold II, when he welcomed several other missionaries, largely those from the Skirt congregation in Belgium. And the Protestants actually came a little bit later, probably in the early 20th century, around 1908, or some actually came a little bit earlier with David Livingstone. So in the Congo, we had two entrances, or inland. On the west part, mainly from the Belgian and the Portuguese, and the eastern part of Congo was predominantly led by the Protestants coming from Kenya and so on and so forth. So those are the two main entrances of missionaries. So for me, it was interesting to actually see the evolution, or how it actually evolved over time. And then in the 1970s, we actually had this emergence of several local Pentecostal charismatic groups that were a little bit distant from these mainstream churches. So those are the three main groups of interviewees, if I can say, that I had to discuss with. So at the bottom up, or at the grassroots level, I had to meet with what I call Kijiji members, or cell groups, as well as shirikas. These are actually small community members at the local level.
Could you, I don't know, just give us a little background on some of your methodology of your research and the interview process, and just kind of tell us how you went about collecting your stories, really, because these are stories. It's not just data; they're human stories.
Absolutely, yeah. So maybe I can start from where I started. First of all, I have to say the methodological aspect of this research is very important. Going on to some of these zones called conflict zones is very not easy and very challenging. One is actually to obtain the IRB, which is Institutional Review Board. So to actually collect data from individuals 18 years old and above, you need to have an approval. And the process is a very challenging one. I'm actually going through one right now. So you need to ensure that your own security is taken care of. Your interviewees, the confidentiality of all those interviewees, how are you addressing some of those issues? So that was the first part. So you need to find correspondent into those places that you are going to interview those individuals. So people in the in conflict zones have different regard, should I say, on issues pertaining to their life, and they are actually in survivor mode, should I say, security-wise. They are very careful on who reach out to them. So you need to build that trust with local populations that are going through conflict, because they always see through the lenses of conflict. Am I endangering my life and those of my family members by actually having to contact this individual? Some questions that I received, initial questions were, who actually are supporting your research? Who are actually the one behind this particular research? We have seen some of them that were actually spies. So those are very important questions that you receive earlier on in your research. So my research was interdisciplinary in nature, and I used a qualitative method. So why not quantitative or mixed? I sense that all these individuals or populations are not just numbers, but they are people who can share stories, as you mentioned, stories that are not necessarily easy to hear or easy to recount. So those are the phases that I actually took. One was to have the IRB, and number two, to contact individuals that are locally based and to find gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are those individuals that can facilitate your entrance to these communities. You may actually end up speaking with leaders that know people who can help you meet other people. So they will give you an entrance into those communities. For instance, if Michael know a particular community, he will say, oh, I actually spoke with Roger. So there is a trust in bridging the researcher to those communities. So those were the main aspect of my methodology and the implementation of this qualitative study. And maybe I can conclude with this by saying that not everything that you plan ahead of time will actually be as you go on the field.
Thinking now specifically about the main title and the main thematic interest of your book, Peacebuilding. I love this word. I love how it's one word, peacebuilding, a verb. And I wonder if you could tell us what you mean by, I think we have a general idea, but maybe if you could go deeper into what you mean by peacebuilding. And I'm interested in, you make a comparison between what you call, I might not pronounce this correctly in French, but semblant and veritable peace, these two types of peace, between justice and peace. And you already mentioned another distinction between resolution and transformation. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what peace building is to you in this context, and also how religion and spirituality can really contribute on the ground to peace building. I mean, we know as people of, or presumably people of faith, we know an idea of how it contributes, but how it can really make practical inroads into making peaceful communities.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. So when we talk about peace building, and we know in academia, definition, conceptual framework is very important. I actually spent some time just to include that particular chapter in my book. I think it's the second or third chapter. So peace building, in short, is actually activities that are taken in order to ensure that peace actually takes place. That's in short. However, the questions underlining that particular definition is very important. Some actually argue on what should we include in processes or initiatives that involve what we call peace building. Who should be included? How can we measure all our activities that we actually putting into place? So that particular term came into existence in the early 1990s with the then UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali agenda for peace. So for him, the aim of peace building, which he included in a revised version of that book, Agenda for Peace, it was almost a report, was to provide structures for the institutionalization of peace by tackling causes of conflict, prevention of the relapse of this particular conflict, without necessarily using peacekeepers or peacekeeping operations. That was the foundation. I can actually say that that's when the word peace building started in the 1990s. So now the word actually have a variety of definition. So in the context of my book, I actually talk about religious peace building. So it's more specific on religion or religious actors or religion as an agency towards peace. So others may actually say Christian peace building could be that specific, or you can also have Islamic perspective to peace building. In other words, you are using these actors or these avenues to attain one of the main outcome, which is peace. So, and again, we can actually discuss, if you want, on the distinctions within the framework of what we understand by peace. You can have negative peace or positive peace. That's when we actually see also the distinction from conflict resolution and conflict transformation. In conflict transformation, we are actually targeting, or we are envisioning a positive peace outcome. In other words, peace that is sustainable and sustaining, and which seeks to understand the root causes of conflict in general. And then negative peace is mainly, as Galtung indicated is just the cessation of conflict or war, which is it's not necessarily what peace one may call, but at least it's the beginning.
Within the context of the DRC, maybe you could comment briefly on the Catholic perspective on the theology of peace. I'd love to hear more. You cited a thinker and a theologian I'd never heard of before, and I really want to read him now. Rene Coste or Cost, I'm not sure if that's, but he speaks about kind of the Holy Spirit as being a facilitator of peace. I mean, it's all things we understand instinctually, but I just love that he gave a language to it. And I would love to hear a comment on what I think was your master's thesis, which you reference about the Ruah, or the Holy Spirit, and the peace of Shalom. I'd love if you could maybe elaborate on that for us, just because I think it's such a fertile idea.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. The premise of my dissertation actually started from that dissertation, my master's MA in Biblical Studies, where I focus on the role of the Ruach Adonai, which is translated sometimes as the Holy Spirit, the role of the Holy Spirit in positive or creative transformations of individuals or communities. I was actually using the pericope or the chapters in Judges 13 to 14. So we had different actors or different entities, actual entities, to use the process theology language. So actual entities are all these individuals that are in the process of becoming. We are always in the process of becoming. So the encounters that Samson in Judges had, not only with his family, but also with the Philistine, was an important encounter where he had to respond or to react to some lures, L-U-R-E-S, invitation to either follow what the parents wanted him to do or to follow his own emotions and other attractions. And that's where we see the implications or the involvement of the Holy Spirit. So I sense that the Holy Spirit in the Christian perspective has an important role to play as far as peace is concerned. The Holy Spirit does not coerce us. The Holy Spirit does not take our place in terms of our responsibility and accountability. The Holy Spirit invite us. The Holy Spirit inspire us. It persuades us. If you use the, I'm very cautious about the gender that I'm using in the Holy Spirit here, but I will just employ the Holy Spirit. There is an invitation, inspiration, or persuasion, not a coercive or impulsion from the Holy Spirit in actually accepting those invitations. So let's apply this to the context in the Congo. So you have different stakeholders that are actually having all these interactions that can lead to either peace or conflict. Each one of those individuals or communities have an opportunity to accept those potentials or possibilities of peace or to continue conflict. So our choices actually lead us to what we actually have as outcomes. So it's really, for instance, I could receive an invitation from Michael to join this particular meeting. I could have accepted or rejected, and those choices have implications. So that's how I actually linked the Holy Spirit into my master's dissertation. I hope I answered.
No, definitely. It's such a, I mean, there's such poetry there. And I love what you said about the Holy Spirit not being, I remember hearing once, you know, religion should never be coercive. You use the word coercive, and the Holy Spirit is not a coercive agent. It's an invitational agent. And I like the way that you frame that. It's something I was thinking, after I finished the book, so actually I was thinking about that. It was a deep spiritual moment in your book. So I commend you for it.
Fantastic. So maybe I can tackle the question that you get. I think I forgot about the shalom, salam.
Yes.
Of this. So all these words that we use are actually very important and deep word that can help us to build interreligious dialogue. So what actually unite communities? I think prayer can be that platform that can unite Muslim, people from different ethnic groups, and to think about what unite us more than what divide us. So those platforms, so Shalom, Salam, is a platform, is an invitation for all those who have their own identity to find a common ground. So in my master dissertation, MA dissertation, was that particular place where the Holy Spirit will actually meet us, or will have a meeting point between different community, a consensual place. So we come to prayer not because we are forced to go to prayer, but because we want to go to prayer, to have that particular meeting.
Maybe Rogers is a good way to kind of to segue into, and you brought up earlier, but the sharika in the small Christian communities, and what you learned and saw about how these small communities are being agents of peace building, and where they fit in the larger church structures. Just that's a very broad question, but anything you'd like to share with us? It's kind of a new initiative, and we'd like to build our knowledge about how small Christian communities are operating. So anything you'd like to share about your experience?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So maybe the organizational aspect of the, we can use these two different churches, the one that I mentioned in my book. Let's use, for instance, the Catholic Church. So you have the bishop, the diocese, you have the parishes, and so on and so forth. So the lowest in terms of hierarchy level of the church structure is that of the what we call Communauté Ecclésiale de Base, or a Shirika. So Shirika, in fact, is a very interesting word, because in Congo, in the western part of Congo, they use small community, there is a term, small Christian communities, or CVB, which is also the same in Latin America, in Brazil. So those spaces are actually spaces that give an opportunity to lay people to share their ministries, and to meet, to have this, what I call pastoral approach that is of proximity. So the needs of the population are well met at that particular level. I'm not saying that the leadership does not necessarily have an involvement or a role to play in those particular spaces, but it's much more easier, I should say, especially because of the decentralization aspect of some of these religious communities. So you see the same thing in the two other churches. So in terms of conflict resolution, or conflict transformation, or mediation, for instance, I'll give you an example. I was in Goma, and it's interesting that they amidst conflict, war going on, you see all these community meeting early in the morning, 5 o'clock, it's still dark. Wow. And those were some of my challenges that I had to actually go through, to leave my place where I was staying, and then to go in, I mean, still dark, nobody's out, but people are still meeting from 5 to 6. And you have prayer. Usually it's mainly prayer. And in some instances, they may have Eucharist, and so if the priest is actually available. However, people meet early in those, early on in the day, and they discuss about liturgy and pastoral letters, and so on and so forth. And one specific example that really got my attention and really appreciated those pastoral approaches was two individuals that were in conflict. One from a different religious tradition with his neighbor. So this was an issue that they had in terms of their parcels or properties. So the priest invited those two individuals. So this is the moral authority that we can see at play right now. And then the leader of those Shirika met with those two individuals and resolve that particular conflict at the local level, rather than going to a court and so on and so forth. So it's interesting, those who are familiar with the scriptures, I teach this in my freshman, sophomore classes on 1 Corinthians. Paul was inviting the church of Corinth to actually resolve at the local level some of those conflicts. And you can actually see the same thing happening at the local level.
If you could just give us an idea of what the Catholic Church as an institution is doing to lead peace building efforts in the DRC. I'm wondering if we mentioned a little about ecumenical and interfaith dialogue, if they're driving that, if they're helping sustain that, and maybe if there are some, if you had any critiques or things that the Catholic Church could be doing better in this effort, both perhaps in the DRC and if you wanted to even say internationally based on your research.
Absolutely, yeah. So maybe I can start with the role of the Catholic Church, globally speaking, is we have seen the Pope Francis. Pope Francis was scheduled to go to Goma. That could have been a very great moment, but for health issue, he couldn't actually go this year. I think it was in July. And he has really, you can see actually in the mentioning of Congo in prayer, invitation to peace, and so on and so forth, has been consistent with Pope Francis. And I really appreciate, and the Congolese and the people in the Great Lakes region appreciate that. However, there is something that I sense that we can actually draw from those invitations from the Pope Francis. And this actually is really about different conference of bishops from different regions. I sense that the Great Lakes region conference of bishops can actually step in. I've been searching and trying to understand what is the role of these bishops, conference bishop of Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo. Why don't they play that important role of trying to unite these communities that are actually tearing apart? We are observing, and I'm aware of the sensitivity, especially after the genocide. I think the Catholic Church was very harshly critic on its role in that particular time, but that should not be an excuse not to be involved in peace building efforts. We also see the, I think it's CAM, which is the larger organization body of the conference bishops of Africa and Madagascar. They have not actually, I haven't seen so far their involvement in trying to resolve. So we have left those initiatives to politically oriented individuals, although they may be religious, but they are more interested in their politics. So I sense that we are missing an opportunity here to actually help those communities to come together. So those are my first impression on how we can at least help. The conference bishop of the United States of America, there was a particular pastoral letter, or I think communique, that they actually sent out, I think in the early 80s or somewhere there. I actually quote that in my book, which had called different stakeholders. I think it was during a conflict in the Middle East or somewhere there. We haven't heard the solidarity of these communities, and I hope that they actually, through this media, can at least call these our brothers and sisters, as Pope Francis indicates in Fratelli Tutti, to think about our brotherly or partnership or humanity as a whole. So those are my initial thoughts on what is going on. And to conclude, maybe the role of the local or national conference of Congolese bishops has really been critical and very important, in my view. One is through the conference of bishops that we obtained at least the influence the previous president not to seek a third unconstitutional term. So that was through the Catholic Church in particular, and of course other religious and other political leaders are played out in that regard. So, and the what we call CVB, the local groups really work out, and this is a political aspect of those spaces, so they can actually share information and how to actually take actions against political dictators and so on and so forth. So those are my two aspects or contribution or thoughts in regard to Congo here.
I know you mentioned that you might be on your way back to the DRC. If you could talk about the next phase of research and what things look like there presently and what you're hoping for the next iteration of your, I believe, long-term project here.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I have to say that I'm grateful for the National Endowment for Humanities grants that one of my colleagues, Eggers, received. We received a grant to conduct research in Eastern Congo, Eastern DRC, as well as in Kenya and Burundi. So this research focuses on the religious aspect or religion as an agency in the lived experiences of refugees. So we are actually following the trajectory of refugees, Congolese refugees, from their flight experience when they flee Congo to their first settling camps to their resettlement in Congo. By the way, next week I'll be in Knoxville meeting some of these refugees, Congolese refugees, just to have their experiences being shared. So that's my next phase. And one of the outcomes of this particular research will not only be to share these stories, but to publish a book, a co-edited book with my colleague in Knoxville, Tennessee. So those are my next immediate research coming up.
Wonderful. Well, we'll be praying for that and for peace in the Congo and peace in the world. And yeah, well, Roger, thank you so much. I mean, this was you really, like I said, the book came alive, and it's a wonderful read. I will hold it up again, and you know, we look forward to hearing more about your journeys and your work. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you so much, Michael, and please pray for Congo and Central Africa in particular, so that peace can be lived from a positive perspective.